Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Nuanced Progressive podcast. I'm your host, Corey Lepage. Thanks for joining us. This episode is called Politics, Principle, and Leadership. We live in a time where we need to learn how to listen and think for ourselves more than ever, because thinking is a skill. So learn it. Today is a very special episode, not just because it's our first episode, but because I'm joined by a very special guest, Marit Stiles, the leader of the Ontario NDP and the leader of the official opposition at Queen's Park in Ontario here. So thank you so much for joining us, Marit.
It's good to be here. Great to be here.
We're going to deep dive into leadership, principles, and how we navigate politics in a time where there's so much division and distraction right now. So whether you're progressive, skeptical, or just feeling a little disenfranchised when it comes to politics, you're in the right place. So let's get into it. So leadership in politics is never simple. Everyone has their different style of leadership and everyone has different priorities, different goals. And I think that an important thing, Marit, when it comes to leadership is need to be grounded so that people feel what you're saying. In the middle, sometimes a lot of chaos, a lot of noise. So if I were to ask you to think back at a moment in your career when you've realized this is what leadership is, this is what it feels like, and you were certain this is your leadership style. What moment was that? What was happening, and how did it change the way that you lead or your leading style?
That's interesting. I'm going to think back to not too very long ago when on election night in Ontario in the last election here in 2025, and I was getting ready to go out and address the victory party. Of course, we had not won government. It was pretty much status quo, right? The Conservatives, Doug Ford, he had formed another majority government in the snap election, and we were the official opposition again. And so in a sense, it was not obviously the result I wanted. I wanted us to form government. But I also knew that this was an important moment to, and I guess, you have lots of choices in that moment of what you're going to say to people. And that can help people define, where you're going to take things in the next few years. And what I wanted to do, and I decided kind of before I went out, was I really wanted to, to acknowledge where people were at in that election. Like not just speak to our supporters, but to speak through that to Ontarians generally, like people who had maybe supported Ford, people who had not voted even, and talk about, how the message that I got from that election was that people really want us to work together, because that was what I did feel in that election. And I think, recognizing the moment that you are in and not just like saying, okay, I'm going to give the same speech I would have given if it was a different result or that I thought I would give at the beginning of this election. Like you've got to know, and it's an important moment for a leader to say, I'm going to seize the reins right now and send that message through to the voters, through to my members, through to my volunteers and candidates like you, like this is what this election is about and here's what we're going to do next. And I think it's a really important for leaders to, it's like the most important moment to lead is when things don't go the way you want.
Absolutely. And for context, I was a candidate for the NDP who ran provincially here in the riding of Timmins in Northern Ontario. And obviously, our election night was the same as yours, although I wasn't elected to Parliament. The NDP was ended up having, for the most part, it was considered a victory for us because we had retained the seats that we wanted to retain during this election. And I get what you're coming from. So for you, that part of leadership was real, like in the situation of, okay, these are the results of this election, and moving forward, obviously, it's going to drive you in a different way. So that's interesting. And there's so much going on. So you're on social media every day.
Yeah.
And we all are. And we get to see things happening from across the world every single day from your phone. We get to see leaders from different countries, from leaders all over Canada. And everyone has the different leadership styles. So my question was, if you have someone that you feel like you relate to, or even the leaders, whether they are a leader right now or from history that you might look up to or someone like that.
Well, people aren't going to be surprised when they hear me talk about people like Ed Broadbent or Jack Layton or anything, but I like to see people who can also laugh at themselves a little bit and have some fun with things. I think even some of the most serious people, like Elizabeth Warren in the United States, like she can seem very serious. She's talking about really heavy issues, but she can also do it in a kind of lighthearted way sometimes. I appreciate that.
She's approachable,
And she comes across as really approachable. And I look at like Mamdani and stuff like that in New York, and nobody's to be surprised that I think his campaign's really interesting.
I'm excited about him.
Yeah, it's interesting. And he's talking about really bold ideas, which things that people haven't talked about in a while. So that's exciting, but it's also, doing it with a bit of humor, right? And also, showing like what other people, like you don't need to listen to me all the time. I can go out and actually ask other people what they think. That to me is just as interesting, if not more, to hear what, regular folks are thinking, or, also experts in fields. Like I want to know what they're thinking. I think that's interesting. And I'd say too, like one of the great things about social media is watching, the new folks, especially younger folks, like younger people, and what they're able to do and how they are bridging that knowledge gap, like you talked about at the beginning of your podcast, making sure that people are getting good, solid information at a time when it's really hard to navigate all that.
It is. You have all kinds of information coming your way at every second of every day, and who knows what information you're getting that's actually accurate. So it's hard to navigate. But no, I appreciate your answer. And I personally, when I ran for my campaign, it was a question I had to think about as well. And I had to find myself, who I was. And part of that was finding maybe politicians I looked up to, especially given my age. So, and someone that always came up was Jack Layton, of course. So Jack Layton was an inspiration and was a great leader for Canada and the NDP and amongst other ones. But we share that one in common, Jack Layton, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to be honest, like I was been around a few years longer than you have in this party. And, Jack wasn't always the same, right? No. Like he changed, he evolved, his approach, the way he spoke, the kind of language he used. I mean, he really, and how he connected with people really changed over time. He learned just as much as everybody else learned about him.
And it's been easier to witness because Jack wasn't that long ago. Other politicians like Tommy Douglas is another one that I love to look up to, more in terms of the way that he led his government, the way that he led innovative ideas for his province, but also the rest of Canada, and just the way that he led, exactly. I think it was inspirational.
We have people right now in the NDP, like Wab Kinew. We were talking about Wab Kinew earlier today, the Premier of Manitoba, who's the first, he's extraordinary, but he's an Indigenous man, First Nations. He's leading a social democratic NDP progressive government.
And he's not shying away from anything. He's proud of who he is.
Yeah, and I love the way he connects to people, and I think, it comes through. And I mean, he's, I think, the most popular politician in Canada right now. So it's not just Manitobans who appreciate it, but everybody does. Yeah,
he's an inspirational figure right now in Canada. And so maybe a little bit of a different type of question or a different topic next, because as we've talked about, I ran as a candidate, and I'm a young candidate. I ran when I was 24 years old. And not only for myself, but speaking to people of my generation, a lot of people my age or of younger generations feel disenfranchised, feel disconnected from politics. They feel like no matter what party forms government, that no change will come. And I feel like that's a sentiment not only in Ontario, but a little bit across the country, and even in other countries, right? It's a movement because there's so much linked to, again, I think it links back to social media. You see something happening in the United States, and you don't realize it's in the United States. It feels like it's in your backyard. So everyone kind of has that same sentiment. And so to get back to that, the younger generation, a lot of people feel disenfranchised. So if you had to sit, not me, but with someone else who does feel disenfranchised, and sit in a room with them for 5-10 minutes, what would you try and tell them to change their mind or give them a bit of hope and inspiration for government?
Well, actually, I'm going to turn it around on you there, because I think the most important for me, and I've said this when I've met with groups of young people before who've asked me about, what my vision is for connecting with young people, I always say, no, we should be listening to you. I mean, I'm 55. I have a young daughter who's 24 and one who's 21, and I really believe that right now, and I see that disconnection. I see it everywhere, and it isn't just young people either. You know, that are not. You know, it is a lot of Ontarians, a lot of people out there are not voting. They don't see a reason to. But here's what I'm hearing. Here's what I'm hearing. You can tell me if you think this sounds about right. When I talk to younger people, I hear that they don't see a path forward for them in the future.
It does feel like that.
Right? They've been left behind.
The same has, exactly, because the main topics of discussion right now are things that might not even apply mostly to our generation. We aren't talking sometimes a lot about the cost of housing, and now we are more, especially with the NDP and in Ontario. I know you've talked about this issue quite a bit, but the cost of housing is a huge issue for us. The cost of living, for everyone it is, but especially for younger people who are trying to save up and build their family here in Ontario.
Well, and I think what I can offer younger people is, when you're looking at that issue of you're not being offered the jobs that are going to pay the bills, or you don't have rent that is affordable, so you can't afford to save. Like we were talking about, like a lot of younger people are living at home with their folks just to be able to save, and even then can't imagine ever owning a home, let alone being able to afford to rent their own place. Like it is extremely expensive, and it's expensive in places like where we are right here in Timmins, let alone in cities like Toronto.
Absolutely.
So I think a lot of younger people, it's not just like what the issues they're facing, but it's what are the solutions. And I don't think that what they're hearing from the government, which tends to be, oh, we're just going to build more homes, that we're going to help developers build more homes for people, it seems like much of a solution. And first of all, it's not working, and you see that life is just not getting easier. But the other thing is, the homes that are being built are not affordable at all. They're just not. And so, it's going to take, I think at this stage, bolder solutions, because government after government after government have just let things slide for so long. So if I was a young person today, I would be saying, I don't want to just hear the same old junk about, housing, it's so important, it's so critical. Well, yeah, okay, but what is the solution? And, we are the only ones that are talking about actually getting government back into funding the building of affordable homes. And, governments used to do that. Right? Back up until the late mid-90s, provincial and federal government, like national governments, provincial governments used to fund that stuff. And so we had not-for-profit housing, we have co-ops, we have rent that was geared to income. It's not going to be for everybody, but it might be something to start you out, or it might be something that, seniors can retire into, things, just options for people.
Exactly.
And that hasn't been built in, 30 plus years now. So no wonder there's a gap. No wonder there's a gap. And so we've got to act quickly and start to do things in a bold way. And the other thing I want to add there is that if we do it the right way, and we buy Ontario lumber, and we build with that Ontario lumber, we are creating jobs, we are keeping industry going, and that's going to help our economy, and that's going to create opportunities. So, we've got to also not forget that it's time to kind of take a second look at the economy. What kind of jobs are available for people? A lot of young people are surviving off of gig jobs.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And you're seeing that.
Absolutely. Some people are living off of gig jobs as their second employment, right, too. And it's just getting by. And I liked one of the answers they give towards the beginning as well, and how it's important to listen, at least, because I think that's the most important role you can have as a politician. You need to listen to who you're representing. And for a large part, more than maybe I might be biased in this because I'm young and I'm inside the generation, but it feels like sometimes there's almost a culture shift as well. And which is part of the reason why I decided to run, because we need people of all generations representing us, right? And sometimes it feels like we're not being heard in the different things that we're dealing with as in our generation versus maybe older generations. They don't get it sometimes.
And I think a lot of young people that I talk to will say, oh, I don't understand this or that. And so I don't feel like I can really vote, or I can really understand the issues. I can't really talk about them. But look, everybody feels like that most of the time, right? We're often we don't all understand everything, and navigating our election system is not easy. But the other thing that's turning a lot of young people off, I keep hearing, is that kind of everything is always fighting each other. It's like the opposite sides, and one side says one thing and the other side says the other, and you don't know who to believe. And the other thing that young people, I would like to share is that, and I'm hearing a lot of young people talking about this right now, is politics doesn't have to be done like this. There are lots of different systems around the world that work differently than the way ours does.
Absolutely.
And it would give people, their voices would mean more. Your vote would mean more in some of these different systems. We could do that here in Ontario, like we call it electoral reform.
Yeah.
There's
Something
lots
that
of
I
things
think
like
was
that.
a promise federally from the Justin Trudeau campaign
Yes,
back in
it
2016.
was.
And then he came back and said that the statistics showed that not enough people cared about the issue for him to move forward with it.
So that's great, right? And there's another example of why people don't vote. It's like you feel like, I hear this all the time from people. They say, well, politicians, they say one thing during an election and then they go and they do another thing. I think all of us have a responsibility for, speaking some truth about things. Get out there. If you promise to do something like that and people were so excited about it, you darn well deliver it. And if it doesn't work after a couple elections, you could, take another look. But I really do think that, people are getting tired of that kind of cynical politics, and I hear it all the time.
I agree. And we deserve a government, whether it be provincially and federally, on all levels of government, that will enact on those promises. And which is why I'm looking forward to the next provincial election. This will be a really interesting one.
And you're right, like bringing, as you said at the beginning, having younger people, like a mix of people that are running. It's, it was, if you go around the halls of Queen's Park and you look at the walls of the legislative building, it's all these great big portraits of all the former premiers of Ontario. There's only one woman. And there's nobody up there who's not, other than that, there's nobody who's not a white old male, man, and they're older too, right? And okay, so they have some experience and everything, but we are so much better when we elect people who are like younger people who aren't all old white men. And I got nothing against, white men and men who are older too, but I think it's good to bring young people into the conversation because the decisions that we make right now are going to impact you guys for the next, the next 50, 60, hopefully 70 years that you're alive,
and
right?
the way we're going, maybe even longer than that with the way we're advancing.
You got to live with this stuff.
Absolutely. Politics is more than the present moment. It's about building a better tomorrow, like we just talked about. We're doing things that my generation and younger generations and future generations will have to live with for years and years and decades in a lot of parts, and we're still living with decisions that were made decades ago. So and we just finished a provincial election. Obviously we're still dealing with that. We're working towards the next one, but in this hypothetical situation, if you were elected premier tomorrow and we sat back here in 10 years from now, how will Ontario have changed, and how will things have changed for people in their daily lives, especially for working families and communities here in the north of Ontario?
Well, I like to say that I hope people, a few decades from now, if I was premier, after our policies have gone into play and everything, I'd like to think that life would just be a lot easier for people. Just to put it really simply, like you shouldn't have to work multiple jobs just to pay for groceries or rent or get your kid the support they need, right? Like you should be able to have work hard and be able to provide for your family and have a few nice things, have somewhere nice where you can get out and, swim in the lake or play with your kids in the playground once in a while, and know that you're not going to be bankrupt if somebody in your family gets sick. I think it's a really basic thing. And some of that is about, I hope also means that we will have changed things in the economy a little bit so that we're not so beholden to what's going on in another country. So like what's happening with Donald Trump right now, that's causing so much chaos for us here. A lot of people are scared and a lot of people are losing their jobs. I want to make sure that we're protected, that we are focused more on how we can be a little bit more self-sufficient that way, build our economy up, buy here, build here, and make sure that people, make a decent enough wage too in their jobs, whether you're a daycare worker or you work in a mine or whatever, that you can actually have a decent life and then your kids will be taken care of.
Yeah. And in a way, this was the reality at some point in Ontario. Things have changed. That's right. And speaking in tariffs and that whole economical situation, other than that, I think we're obviously caught completely off guard because of decades and decades of free trade and getting a bit used to the way things were, and it's forcing us to shift a bit. And not even to mention other things like automation and in artificial intelligence, and it's really changing the landscape of our economy, of our culture, of so many things. So we as a province, as a country, in the world will have to adapt to so many things when it comes to that as well. Maybe some types of careers won't be the same in the next 10 years from now. And we're going to have to make sure that those people don't just go out on the street. When you used to have a high paying job, you used to be able to support your family and put food on the table. And suddenly the career that you're working in doesn't exist anymore. They're doing massive layoffs for whatever reason, automation or whatever it may be. We're going to have to find solutions for these families. That's for sure, because I think that's something that we're certainly going to be dealing with in the next, whether it be the next decade or the next 20 years.
It's really interesting because, when you talk about that, it reminds me that, a lot of what makes us as New Democrats different than the other parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, for example, and even the Greens, is our focus is not on giving all that government support to the wealthier people or the big corporations to, we'll give you all that support so hopefully it all trickles down to helping all those other folks.
So
that system has not worked.
Yeah, you don't believe in trickle down economics.
No,
okay.
and I also think, again, if we keep as you said, it hasn't always been like this. There are different ways to do things. And, free trade came in when I was already really an adult. So, it's been a while. But, we used to do things a little differently here. And some aspects of that and that relationship we have with the United States, is important for us. Like, there's no question. But again, there's different ways that governments can govern and that can support the economy. And, one of the things we can do is we can attach conditions. So if corporation is going to get a lot of money to set up shop here in Ontario, then we expect those jobs to stay here. And we want them to be good jobs, and there's nothing wrong with that. Other countries do that. We can do that here. And we can really build more opportunity that way. And like you said, jobs do, and things change. We see that all the time, every day here. But there's a lot that we produce here in Ontario that the world needs. And, let's not forget that some of that is also our people,
our workforce,
our workforce. So, you and I have talked about this, but we gotta make sure we don't leave education behind. We are really paying a price right now. Students are paying a price. They're literally paying a price because it's expensive. But colleges and universities here are laying off a lot of people because the government in Ontario doesn't fund education like colleges and universities like any other province does.
And in a lot of cases, you see people going to educate themselves outside of the country. And it's a fact that the best thing that you can do to support your workforce is invest in education. If you have highly educated people in your country, you're going to have a highly capable workforse, and that's just a fact. And
healthier people, happier people,
absolutely.
But again, when I just tell you, I've been doing this tour around Ontario. It's called All In for Ontario, and I've been listening to a lot of people, and what really strikes me every time is no matter how old they are, where they come from, what part of the province they're in, what they do, they're not asking for miracles, right? They're just asking for pretty basic stuff. Like I said earlier, I just want to be able to enjoy my life, not worry so much. I want to be able to know that my kids will be taken care of if I have kids. It's pretty simple and have something to do that I enjoy, right? And that at least I'm making a decent living. Pretty simple. Come home at night safe to my family.
I'd very least expect. Absolutely. And it's something, and people do want to keep raising families in Ontario, and it touches on all those things. We want people to continue to develop and grow their families in Ontario, and we got to make that easier for them. We've touched a little bit on this maybe towards the beginning, but it feels like opinions nowadays become a label. Like if I believe in something and someone believes differently, we see each other a certain way, right? It's almost like sometimes I say, we could agree on 9 out of 10 things, but because we disagreed on that one thing, there's some type of divisiveness between us. We see each other differently because there's something that we don't agree on, and we take that as a big thing. In most cases, it's a small factor. It shouldn't play such a role in our daily lives, but it does. And I think that we've talked about social media and the access to information that's so readily available. It's contributing to that because everything is everywhere, and you see something on social media, on TikTok or on X or something, and you like it. Well, you're going to see a lot more of that kind of content, and you become very short-sighted in that type of ideology sometimes, and then I feel like we've become a lot more individualistic versus being aimed towards community. And it feels like politics and and social issues has become just labels that define us. So how do you think we got here? And how do you think, or what kind of role do you think, if anything, the government has to play in helping this? I call it almost like a pandemic because it's widespread, and it's something that almost feels like it's a rolling ball. It's hard to control, but it is something that I believe needs to be done, or something needs to take place to bring empathy and understanding back to politics and just in our daily lives.
It's something I think people are grappling with all over the world, right? And we're seeing people take really extreme positions to kind of get more followers. And it's, I won't get into like all of the reasons for that, but I do think, or what I think, but I do think that I always say, like, when I'm on the door with somebody, and I can't remember who said this to me first, but when I go to the door and I knock on somebody's door, and they come to the door, like, the first thing I'm not there to argue with them or even convince them necessarily of anything. I really want to be able to hear what they have to say, and I'm not going to hold it against them. There's not that many people out there that I don't like.
Well, that's the thing. Because
people might be surprised at that, but we all have people in our lives that we disagree with about all kinds of big things and small things, and it's okay. It's okay to disagree. And also, I would say generally, we have more that unites us as human beings than that divides us. There's no question. And so, but your question was like, what can we in government, in politics do to change that? I mean, I just want to say, like, first of all, we need to model that behavior, because we have a political system, like I said earlier, which is like very combative, right? It's very, what I would say, oppositional. So you've got literally, like, I am the leader of the official opposition. I sit across from Doug Ford, who is the premier, and I ask him questions and then he answers them, but that's not really what happens, right? I ask him a question, he doesn't answer. Everybody's kind of debating issues, but they're not really necessarily debating. They're just giving speeches about their position. And the best politicians, the best people in the legislature are the best people to listen to, that you want to listen to, are the ones who are actually listening to what the other side is saying, and then responding to it and saying, I don't agree with you on this, but I was thinking about it this way. Like, that is what's supposed to happen.
Have an open mind
and listen to the other person. And then, if you could still disagree, but you can actually get a little bit closer, maybe.
And
right?
Absolutely. And I think an important thing that everyone should really, because sometimes it's a reflex that you need to develop. Everything is not black and white. Just because I believe something and you believe something differently than I do doesn't mean either of us are completely right or wrong on the issue. And doesn't mean that we're a complete different spectrum on the issue either. But sometimes that gets lost in translation, I feel like.
And I think, again, like, you can't underestimate how much, like, sort of the way that the culture influences that, or the way that our political system operates, how that influences it, because everybody sits on opposite sides and nobody's really working together anymore. And they used to. Politicians from different political stripes used to go on the road in committee hearings and really listen to people and really change. Their minds would be changed. Nowadays, it doesn't really change as much, right? They've decided they want to do it this way, and that's the only way, and they're just going to move forward because that's their ideology. Well, because of that, a lot of people get sick and tired of hearing these same things, that nobody's actually hearing the problem I have. Nobody's coming up with the solutions that I need.
They become disenfranchised, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah,
and
they give up on it.
Yeah.
And so I would just say, like, the lesson, or the 2 cents I would have too for anybody listening to this or watching this is, make sure when that politician, you see one of those folks that represents you or who's running, like Corey here, has run in an election, take the time to tell them what you really think, what your issues are, where you're at. If you have an idea, we really do want to hear that, and we should want to hear that. And your elected representatives should be listening to you. They don't always have to do exactly what you say.
Absolutely.
They couldn't possibly, but they have an obligation to listen to you.
Absolutely. And if you're going to be a good leader, like we talked about leadership earlier, to be a good leader is to listen to who you're representing. And I think at the basic necessity of leadership, it comes down to that. To be able to understand what someone is telling you and to actually listen and to have at least empathy towards their issue, even if you might not agree with it. And I'm going to circle back a little bit real quick in regards to leadership and values and stuff like that. And I want to see, obviously you weren't brought up in Ontario. Is there a specific value or core value belief that you developed as you were growing up that you still hold to this day and that you would stick to no matter what, even if it got you in hot water politically?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I grew up in, you alluded to it, I grew up in Newfoundland, and I came to Ontario, because there were opportunities and jobs. At that time, Ontario was booming, right?
Yeah.
And Newfoundland was struggling. And so, but I grew up in a very small community outside of St. John's. My family, they had a small farm. They had other jobs, but we also had a little farm. We grew vegetables and had some animals and stuff. But I grew up in a place which relies very heavily on resources, the fishery in particular, right? And so I really believe in the ability of us to use those resources that we have been gifted with as Canadians, whether it's forestry or mining or whatever.
Like up here up in the north.
Yeah, very much like here in the north. And I really believe in that. But I also learned that, the people who know the most about how to take care of those resources, how to make sure they last us the longest, and we get the most out of them are the people themselves who know those resources, the people who are hunting them or fishing them or mining them or, in forestry. And so I think that's really, really important. And I think there's, I think that's really important, and that we take very, and I always say, we take that responsibility really seriously, right? Because that's also our future here, right? It's our future.
Absolutely.
Our future is, and when I hear, some people in some parts of the province who don't understand that piece of it, I think, they forget that that's what built this province and this country.
And so how some politicians think that they know better from the actual experts or the people who work in the fields that we're trying to
Classic,
make
right?
around.
Bay Street in Toronto does not know, better than people in Northern Ontario know about what it means to grow the economy here, to keep a community healthy. And that it's not, and I guess the other piece of that is I grew up knowing that, when a school shuts down in your community, it's the death of a community. When that's gone, or when you can't get healthcare in that community, that's it. This is critical to, continuing to keep our communities going. And that's essential if we're going to be able to continue to drive our economy and create jobs and opportunities for people all across Ontario.
Because a lot of times the small communities are the ones that are generating a lot of these, we talked about resources. Timmins is a smaller community. We're built on natural resources like mines and forestry. And we have surrounding small communities, and exactly the same thing you just described happens where they lose their school or they lose their hospital. And it's just like you said, the community dies, right? It's the heart of the community, and you lose your essential services. And
then what happens when the government comes back and says, actually, you know what? We need that mine. We need to get that forestry industry going again. Well,
Yeah, but is it worth spending the money to keep the services running in this community in order to do this?
You gotta do both. You can do, and you know what you can do? You can walk and chew gum at the same time. Governments used to be able to do that, right? People should ask themselves, if schools are not, if you feel like your kid or yourself are in school and you're not getting the support you need, is it because education has changed, or is the government just not doing a good enough job anymore?
In a lot of the cases, that is the case, because education involves so many different things. It's, in Ontario here, we've had a lot of changes under the current government when it comes to classrooms, when it comes to classroom sizes, the way that how many teachers we have in classrooms. And, so on, but it touches on so many other things. And we talked about earlier in the podcast that education is the most vital aspect of having a strong workforce. And that's just one way of saying the importance of education, let alone the other things that come along with it, with making sure that, because not every kid is the same, right? You need to have access to the services that you need. And if you're going to school hungry, you're not going to learn very well. If you have special needs, it's things that we've been working on, but not quick enough, I think. And I guess to go on a little tangent in regards to education, how do you think, going back to the question of you being premier and then in 10 years from now, how do classrooms change? How do schools change under an NDP government?
Well, we have to start, first of all, we have to start actually, it's not even just, it isn't only about dollars and cents, although some of it is, like they are not funding schools at the same level as they used to. But also we need to start, actually funding education for the kids based on their needs, not just on some formula that just doesn't work. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Like right now, we are finding all across the province of Ontario that it's really hard to find teachers to work in our schools. We're finding it really hard to find educational assistants. And, that's because over many years, the government has sort of made class sizes bigger and, the number of those workers smaller. And so it's becoming more and more difficult. And, kids are also dealing with complicated stuff, especially coming out of the pandemic, right? It had a huge impact. We know that. So, we need to make sure that, our schools have the support they need to support kids right there. That means you got to have people who can help kids who are struggling or falling behind. You need to, and none of that means, by the way, setting our standards any lower. It means actually the opposite. It's like, let's set our standards higher and let's give our kids extra support. Let's make sure our teachers are getting the best resources. Right now, teachers are, paying out of pocket for like the most basic like supplies. And I know I don't hear them complaining about it, but I think it's ridiculous. I want to know that our schools in Ontario are the best in the country, at least.
Absolutely.
And, if we're going to compete internationally, we got to do that.
And we need to.
We got to do that.
In my eyes, if you're going to spend an outrageous amount of money on something, on a sector, it's going to be education.
Yeah.
Because so many bad things come out of underfunded education, whether it be poverty, mental health, addiction. So many waves of bad consequences come from underfunded schools and education. So we need to start taking it seriously.
I always think like a lot of communities right now, including Timmins, but there is not a community in this province that doesn't have a serious crisis right now in addiction and mental health and homelessness everywhere. Communities that have never seen that before, not at the level like this. And we are failing people. And it's, I don't know a family who doesn't have somebody. Like people talk about it like it's somebody else, but the truth is it's us. Yeah. It's our own families. It's our friends. It's
the family member that you never would have wanted to see go down that route, but unfortunately it's the reality. Yeah. Yeah. Like seniors losing their homes, people who work their whole lives. So obviously something has to happen. We have to do something. But like you said, we also should just remember that like with everything, if you invest up front, then you're paying less down the road, because it's a lot more expensive to have to put somebody in an institution than it is to start, early on, to make sure that child is getting the support they need in school. And like you said, not every family right now is doing very well. So let's just make sure kids are getting a healthy snack, healthy meals at school. Let's make sure that our neighbor's kid is doing okay as well as our kid, because someday we will all pay the price if that child's not done well. Absolutely. And I love the way that you put it, how it's so much cheaper in the long run to invest in preventative care and preventative services than it is to deal with the waves of consequences that come from that inaction in the long run afterwards, whether it be through our hospitals and the waiting rooms and mental health institutions, in affordable housing, whatever it is, so many different aspects, and it costs so much money that if we were to invest in the long run right now and fix the issues before they start, or actually invest in preventative care and services. And people do that, right? Yeah. Like we do that in our own families. We think about
now I want to make sure that I'm taking care of this crack in my ceiling
Yeah.
before it gets so big.
Absolutely.
This happened to me, by the way,
Yeah.
in Toronto. It's such a Toronto problem. I had a leaky roof. We never dealt with it. And then one day, a raccoon fell through my roof.
Oh, boy.
It really happened. It was a big raccoon. And I will say, like, I kind of kept thinking, I looked at that giant hole in the ceiling for a long time and said, why did we wait to deal with this?
Yeah.
And now we have to deal with this one.
It's a good analogy. So it feels like our raccoon is for at least this situation, it's the mental health, the addiction and homelessness crisis, because it's that leaky roof that we should have fixed years ago, or at least started to work on. And now the whole roof is in shambles. The whole roof
is falling apart.
And we have a family of raccoons coming through and other animals at the same time.
And they're rabid.
Yeah, they're rabid. Yeah.
No, it's bad. It's really true, right? Like it is kind of like we laugh about it, but it is true, right? And I think that's like the same thing with, anything. Like we take care of our the things that we have because we want them to last longer.
Yeah.
We don't want to have to spend money unnecessarily. It's the same thing in government.
And it's
like, your taxpayer dollars.
Oh, absolutely. We are taxed highly in Canada, Ontario. And to me, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with paying my fair share of taxes, but our taxes should be used in a more efficient way. We should be more careful in the way that we spend our tax dollars at the very least to make sure that we make the most out of the taxes that we pay. And I think that's as much as anybody could ask for, at least.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And to go back to the hole analogy, it feels like sometimes, there's a hole there. We're going to put a flimsy tarp over it and we're going to kind of pretend that it's not there. But sometimes it's still going to leak through there and we know it's there, but we pretend it's not. And that's a huge issue. It's issues that we don't want to talk about.
You got a government here who today in Ontario, and frankly the Liberal government before them, we were talking about this earlier today. They privatized a lot of our healthcare system when they were in power. What's happening is some people would like to see the healthcare system kind of sold off to make money for people, and we don't really believe in that in Canada. We've believed in having a system which has been much smarter and more efficient than anybody else because we take care of people and you're not going to become bankrupt, paying a hospital bill. But our system really works. Yeah. But then governments that want to sell off pieces of it, they start to nickel and dime the healthcare system to a point where it's falling apart, right? Yeah. The roof is falling in, and then people are like, okay, that's it. Tear the whole thing down and privatize it.
Tommy Douglas would be rolling in his grave.
Yeah. And I think that's where that's headed, right? Yeah. Is they're looking for an excuse. And I guess that's like the other thing, right? Is I do think there's more that as people we share in common that divides us, without question.
Absolutely.
But I do think there are some people who want to see who think that it's better to make the kind of wealthier get wealthy, and that, like we talked about earlier, then wealth is sort of going to trickle down, and that just has not happened.
And sometimes
wealthy people just keep getting really wealthy. Like we're talking billionaires here, and most people who should be middle class, like people who make enough money that there's no question they should be able to be just fine, are really, really struggling right now. Something is wrong with that.
Yeah,
we gotta even it out a little bit.
And so we talked a lot about really interesting things. I'm going to lead in trying to end it off a little bit on a tone to summarize everything. I just wanted to touch on a note, like you were talking about that. I think divisiveness, for the most part, is very profitable in itself. And whether it be politicians or podcasts or just anyone online pumping out division as a means of profit, because it's good for them, right? And then it goes back to thinking about yourself and not the best of our communities. And that's something that maybe not politicians or government can fix. It's something that we need to look at ourselves, and we need to take a good look at ourselves and see the way that we react when we see things and start thinking in a more critical way. And I think it leads back down to that, because when we start thinking about all these things that government can do, and we think critically about these things and how we could better invest in Ontario, or whether it be Canada, or even if you live somewhere else, if we can invest properly in the things that will build our future up for our future generations and have strong families, strong communities, strong economy, then we can't ask for better. We just need to put our minds to it and realize that we can attain these goals and we can fight for these things. We just need to realize that they are attainable. They are realistic.
The only way we got half of what we got right now is because people came together and pushed for it. Whether it's like weekends or the fact that you can take a maternity leave or a parental leave when you
Yeah.
have a kid, like that wasn't nobody just said, hey, you know what? I think it'd be, no employer ever said, you know what? It'd be really great if everybody took a year off when they have a baby. Nobody ever said that.
I think a good employer would have that instinct.
They might.
But most big corporations, which nowadays small businesses are a different story, but big corporations,
It's different
you don't
today.
have an employer anymore. You have an entity who employs you.
Well, yeah, and I think it is different today in so much as like people, like a lot of employers are really desperate to find good people to work for them. So it is different. But, a lot of those basic things that we have right now, like we got them because people came together and said, you know what, we're going to stand together and we're going to fight for these things. I really do think that, like you said, people have to remember that, a lot of what is thrown at us, even by politicians. And, I'm a politician, so I know what I'm talking about here on this point, which is that, people like, the next time that we're all talking about the fact that, the healthcare system is in crisis in this province and the emergency rooms are closing and something like is going really bad that way. And next thing you know, Doug Ford is out there saying, you know what, we really need to shut down the bicycle lanes in Toronto. Look, that might be an issue for some people in Toronto, but that's also an attempt to distract people everywhere else from what's really going on in your backyard. He talks about the things that are there. He causes distractions all the time. When he's under criminal investigation for something else, he talks about something outrageous to get your attention away from it, right? And lots of people, that's something, it's a skill. But remember that when you're, like, if you're focused right now on, I got to get, I'm really worried about my aging parent. I need to make sure that they get some home care support and the system is really broken. Don't lose sight of that. Don't let him distract you with talk about, freaking bike lanes in Toronto or whatever it happens to be. Focus on how we're going to get that, because that is what you need right now and you deserve that for you and your family.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Marit, for joining me for the podcast today. It was really special. We all know this was the first episode, and of course, I got the biggest guest I could have gotten for the first episode. So I appreciate it. It was really fun. We've talked before, but I appreciate you taking the time. And I always enjoy having discussions with you. It's always interesting. And to everyone who's listening, I hope today's conversation sparked some reflection, maybe challenge some assumptions that of certain things that you were thinking about in certain ways, and maybe just gave you something to think about a little bit differently. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to follow the Nuanced Progressive on your favorite platform and join the conversation on social media, because this is just the beginning. We're just getting started. We're going to be building this podcast from the ground up, as this was episode 1. You can look forward to having an episode 2 coming our way soon. And just remember, thinking is a learned skill. Think about it. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe.